Hello and welcome to today's pro-democracy variety hour broadcast with your host, Davina. I'm an Australian living in America, may one day become an American citizen. So considering the rise in fascism around the world, I'm always here to discuss current events and the implications for our future, our children's future, the viability of our climate, and the viability of our democratic systems. So thank you to anyone with the time to join me, and thank you to any replay viewers also. I've put as today's topics microwave justice and Peter Navarro getting subpoenaed by the January 6th Commission. And also it's Black History Month, so I'd like to talk about one particular figure who's very significant in American history as well. So what have I got up on screen? Here I have look, I can be tiny in the corner. I have the subpoena from the January 6th committee, who are seeking records and testimony from Navarro, who was the trade advisor to the Trump administration, and who, according to reporting, interviews, and even his own book, was involved in efforts to delay election certification and change the results. So what does the letter say? Blah, 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 pursuant to the authorities set forth. This has been backed up now by a few different judges saying, yes, the January 6th Commission has the authority, even when people challenge it, it has the authority to investigate what happened on January the 6th, and that does have legislative potential. New laws might need to be made to further safeguard America from anti-democratic uprisings such as the January 6th insurrection. For example, you, then a White House trade advisor, reportedly worked with Steve Bannon and others to develop and implement a plan to delay Congress's certification of and ultimately change the outcome of the November 2020 presidential election. In your book, you reportedly in a book, we don't need to say reportedly because he wrote the book. In your book, you described this plan as the Green Bay sweep and stated that it was designed as the last best chance to snatch a stolen election from the Democrats' jaws of deceit. In an interview, you reportedly added that the former President Trump was on board with the strategy, as were more than 100 members of Congress, including Representative Paul Gosar and Senator Ted Cruz. All right. Yes, he released a 3-part report. What did he call the report? The Navarro report. All right. Repeating many claims of purported fraud in the election that have been discredited in public reporting by state officials and courts. So that's nice. They cover that discredited claims. Discredit is a good word. I always see weak reporting on this where they say claims for which there is no evidence, but it's stronger. And we have to approach this from a linguistic angle because it's a war of information, a psychological war. There's a lot of victims of this war. Hundreds of thousands of people have unnecessarily died in the United States from the friendly fire, from being victimized essentially by the trajectory of conservative propaganda. That conservative propaganda has made the argument that COVID was overhyped, so there's been a lot of resistance to getting vaccinated and just complying with public health measures. And that's been to the detriment of a lot of people. Obviously, the death tolls in the hundreds of thousands, even since vaccines were invented and broadly distributed. And now what do we have? We have hundreds of thousands of deaths. We're up to close to 900,000 confirmed COVID deaths. And then, of course, there's the possibly 10 to 30% of people infected with COVID who subsequently suffer from long-term symptoms such as fatigue, debilitating fatigue, potentially mental conditions such as depression and anxiety, and a high risk of developing diabetes in children and potentially Parkinson's in adults. Lots of things, because COVID, if you haven't heard from anybody else, is not just a respiratory condition, it's a microvascular condition. So it's associated with blood clots, high rates of blood clotting and strokes and heart attacks in people whose organs have been essentially attacked by a hypervigilant immune system responding to a novel threat and overreacting to that threat. My watch wants me to get up. My watch is trying to help me in my health kick move to be more active. I didn't stand up, but I've shaken things a bit. There we go. All right, so that was Peter Navarro. What else did I say was today's topic? Oh, Medicare. And that's because, which senator is it? Oh, it's Marco Rubio. Senator Marco Rubio made a comment. So let's check. Was it Marco Rubio? Let's check why Tuberville is trending as well. Oh, Senator Tommy Tuberville, who violated stock trading rules 132 times last year, says it's ridiculous to ban lawmakers from trading stocks. They might as well start sending robots up here, Tuberville said. So the implication is he's saying it's all too human to want to gamble, make speculative investments on the stock exchange, and the fact that you're a senator and have inside knowledge as to the legislative intentions of that body might give you inside knowledge over and above what the public knows. That doesn't matter. It shouldn't be considered an unfair advantage. You should be allowed to keep that advantage. And a lot of other people will probably disagree with what he said. I really did want to see what the Medicare thing was. Oh, congratulations to everybody excited about Futurama coming back. That's just in the news as well. All right. Okay, I found out who it was. It wasn't a senator. It was Republican Representative Thomas Massey. He shared a statistic about the number of people on Medicare who have died of COVID-19. And people have pointed out that the social insurance program is only used by those aged 65 or older. And yes, we do know that COVID has disproportionately impacted older people, but not exclusively impacted older people, and that there are younger people who've died and continue to die and have long COVID symptoms, etc., even in younger age brackets. So yes, 30 million Americans are still uninsured. The direction of including more people in medical coverage was changed under President Obama, whose Obamacare Act or Affordable Care Act helped bring many more million Americans into the fold of being covered by healthcare. So it did something to detach that bond between having a job and having healthcare. There are lots of people who temporarily lose employment, who can be in between jobs. Anyway, I don't need to defend it. Everybody presumably knows that it's better when a higher proportion of the population has access to preventative medical care as well as emergency medical care and ongoing medical care. It's better to have a society, and it's better to have people subscribe within a society to the idea that it's not a rat race, and societies are stronger and more cohesive when you don't leave people to rot in the gutter, and you take steps at a collective level to ensure that people are taken care of and that people take care of each other. And if you don't think that, then I guess you've probably drunk too much from the toxicity of Ayn Rand books and that kind of free-for-all ideological thinking promoted by some libertarians who say life is pie. If you get something, you have to have taken it from someone else. If you want a larger slice of pie, you'd better be you'd better embrace the idea that other people should have crumbs or nothing. Whereas a more pro-social ideology would say, actually, it's not pie, and there's more for everybody when we invest in each other. Now, I'm going to go shortly. Whoopsies. I would just like to note that this story looks horrific. There's a man who's been 45 years in jail, and he was convicted of raping white twin sisters who, when asked to identify their attacker as they were making a report, said all N-words look alike. So they didn't name their attacker at that time and didn't give any descriptive details. But later on, when one man who was known to the police for petty thief was included in a lineup, and he was the only person wearing handcuffs. And so that's the new evidence that's come to light as potentially exonerating details, very, very likely exonerating details. And there was a doctor's report that wasn't submitted to the jury that said one of the sisters was a virgin, and that there was no evidence of being brutally raped, as the sisters claim. You should listen to this, actually. It's an 8-minute long piece, but when the sisters are interviewed, it's such a real life To Kill a Mockingbird scenario in which they appear to be adamant that, yes, they told the truth, and it doesn't matter that there's these fairly considerable irreconcilable differences between what they said to the sheriff when they were first reporting the crime and then what they testified to at the trial. Namely, that initially they couldn't give any identifying details. They just said a black man. And they account for that by saying, well, they were resolved amongst themselves not to tell anybody because they were afraid for their lives. But that's contradicted by the fact that they were reporting this to the police. When they reported the alleged brutal crime to the police, they said all N-words look the same and gave no details. He's probably an innocent man. He spent 45 years in jail. At one point, he was offered parole if he would accept being registered as a sex offender, and he declined that offer. His name is Vincent Simmons. So I should give him that dignity. He spent 45 years in jail, rejected an offer of parole because it came with the condition as registering as a sex offender, and he continues to claim his innocence. And I, for one, think it's very likely that he is innocent, and that those two sisters and the collective machinery of the American justice system has contrived to deprive that man of 45 years of freedom. I'm going to play it a little bit.
He did not commit. His name is Vincent Simmons. He's serving a 100-year prison sentence in Louisiana after being convicted of attempted aggravated rape of two 14-year-old twin sisters back in 1977. But there have always been unanswered questions in this case, and a judge is about to rule on whether Simmons will get a new trial. Lead national correspondent David Begnaud has spent months reporting on this story, and he's got some new developments that could change this case. David joins us now. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Gail. What you are about to hear, the jury never heard. Starting with the initial report that the twins gave to police about who they say sexually assaulted them. A questionable photo, the forensic exam conducted by a doctor on the twins, and then we have an explosive revelation that no one has heard until we started investigating this story.
In the rural...
I wonder what David Begnaud thought was explosive revelation, because it all seemed pretty explosive when I listened to that report, namely that the forensic report from the doctor said no evidence of a rape. The photo that was used revealed the photo from the lineup that revealed there was only one of the suspects that was in handcuffs, not suspects, only one of the men included in the lineup. That's supposed to be a lineup where you gather people together who could reasonably resemble what's been given as an identifying detail, and then and then the victims have to choose independently. The three people making the accusation, there were two sisters and their brother. They had to all identify the man in the lineup. But if there's only one man with handcuffs, then that process is more than flawed. That process is irreconcilable with any consideration of justice, any conception of justice. All right, play a little bit more.
Center of Louisiana. There has been a haunting question hanging over Marksville for decades. Did Vincent Simmons get a fair trial in 1977 when he was convicted of a heinous crime against 14-year-old twin sisters?
He raped two of us, and he put us in a trunk to die. He had me write our names down, and he told us he was going to kill us. And we believed every word of it. And we were not going to tell anyone. Our plan was we were going to die with this.
But 2 weeks later, word got to the sheriff. And that is when Karen and Sharon Sanders reluctantly reported some details, claiming they were forcibly taken by a black man to a country road and sexually assaulted for 3 hours in a car that belonged to their 18-year-old cousin, Keith Laborde, while he was locked in the trunk.
We called him Simmons all night. There's so many things about that night. He gave us his name.
When you were questioned by the sheriff,
Yes.
you never gave the name Simmons.
No, we did not.
You never described what he looked like.
No, we did not.
You said all
Blacks
in-
look alike.
And you said all N-words.
That's right. Sure did.
So how are we to square the fact that that night you couldn't explain anything? You didn't have his name. You didn't know what he looked like. But now you're telling me today, and you testified at trial, that his name was Simmons.
That's right.
How does that happen?
Okay, this is how it happens. We had all three swore to each other that we would not tell a soul.
May I ask you, with all due respect,
Yes.
why did you make that pact?
So she was telling a soul, though, in that moment. She's trying to account for her actions in telling a sheriff all N-words look alike and not giving the name Simmons, with what she's saying now, which is that the man told them told his victims his name. Seems unusual. Seems ridiculous. And I just want to draw attention to some of the body language, because she looked up to the right.
Happens. We had all three swore to each other that we would not tell a soul.
May I ask you, with all due respect,
Yes,
why did you make that pact to not say anything? Why
We
wouldn't
were
you
scared.
immediately report it?
because we were
Victims sometimes don't report crimes, so that's not a particularly insightful question.
scared. He told us that he had friends and that he would come back to kill us if we told anybody.
67 days after he was arrested, Simmons, who was known to police as a petty thief, was sentenced to 100 years in prison, convicted at 25 years old of attempted aggravated rape by a jury of 11 white men and 1 black woman.
The first thing I want to say to you is that I know my client is innocent.
Justin Bonus is the latest attorney to take up Simmons' case. He filed a motion to have Simmons released.
This was a legal lynching.
He is waiting for a Louisiana judge to rule next week on whether or not Simmons is entitled to a new trial.
There's no physical evidence that connects him to that crime. There's no blood. There's no semen. There's no hairs. There's nothing. Sharon talks about bleeding all over the car. Karen talks about a violent rape. Where's the evidence in the car? Where's the blood in the car? There's nothing that supports a crime happened, and there's definitely not anything that supports that a black man committed the crime.
This is important for the viewers to know. A month or so ago, the DA offered to release him, but he wanted him to register as a sex offender. And what did Vincent say to you?
No,
Why?
he didn't do this.
So he turned down freedom
Correct.
because a sex offender registrant meant that much to him
Correct.
that he didn't want to do it.
Correct. Because he's not a sex offender.
This is the man who offered to release him, the current district attorney, Charlie Riddle.
Why did you offer to release Mr.
Because
Simmons?
today, 40 years would probably be the sentence that we would request in a case like this.
This box, this.
Instead,
and this.
Riddle is now left to defend a case that, based on new information, raises more questions about whether Simmons is guilty. Years after going to prison, Simmons obtained the district attorney's evidence file about the case. In it, he claims he found a revealing medical report from the local coroner, a trained doctor who examined the twins. That report was never introduced at trial. One of the attorneys, who was Vincent's defense attorney at the time of trial, says they never knew that the coroner said you were a virgin, that the coroner said there was no evidence of sexual assault found on either one of you.
Okay, well,
They didn't know that.
Well, it's 2 weeks later, and it's still not important. The fact is, he still attempted, and he wasn't successful.
So, still attempted, wasn't successful. It's interesting because their claim was that they were brutally raped for 3 hours. And the doctor's forensic report said one of the alleged victims was a virgin. No, it's just it appears to be a grotesque miscarriage of justice. And I wasn't going to talk about it, but I did because it's so awful that he's lost so many years of his life and that it's still up in the air as to whether or not he'll be granted a new trial and that whether or not he'll be found innocent. I believe he'd be found innocent if granted a new trial, but that's going to be up to a judge next week to decide if he's entitled, based on the fact that there's no physical evidence tying him to a crime and there's no physical evidence that suggests a crime was committed either. Must be such a big emotional burden to carry, to be Black in the United States and know that these type of things continue to happen, that people can harbor such enmity in their heart that they can confect a crime of this nature and that they could push forward for what motivation? Why, if you were a virgin and hadn't even ever had sex, why would you make up a crime to say that you'd been brutally raped for 3 hours by a Black man? And why would you do that? You must be even in To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a fictionalized account of a woman pretending that she's been sexually attacked because she wants to conceal that she was so overcome by sexual feelings that she tried to kiss a Black man working in her home, and to cover that up claimed he attacked her. So at least she has the motivation of trying to deflect from her own actions. And in this case, it just, anyway, boggles the mind. There's something else. I'm going to move on. That's the case of Vincent Simmons in Louisiana. Gross miscarriage of justice that's coming to light now. And I'm grateful to the reporters for bringing it up and to his lawyer for taking on that case. And I just hope that justice is done. And I hope that there's enough public concern and enough public outrage that it's taken seriously and that contributes to pressure on the legal system to deliver a just outcome by granting him a new trial. Now, the other note is that democracy is also under threat from people who want to diminish the political power that is exercised by Black people in the United States and minority voters of all descriptions, because they have strategically and specifically introduced policies that create obstacles to exercising the right to vote for people who live in dense populations in various states where there's a Republican-controlled legislature. So David Pepper is someone who's been researching this. Is he from Ohio? He wrote a book called Laboratories of Autocracy about how there's various ways in which different states, Republican-controlled states, where they are practicing to bring forward successful legislation that is successful in impeding access to the vote for targeted demographics.
The key to the system that's attacking democracy across this country are these rigged, gerrymandered state house districts, not Congress, but state house districts, where all these politicians can attack democracy, do other extreme measures without ever fearing for their reelection. It's that lack of accountability that's the source of everything else they do. And if you want to see how much they know this, watch these people squeal when you finally say, we're going to hold you accountable and make you be in fair districts. It's happening in Ohio right now, where the Constitution was changed by a supermajority bipartisan coalition of voters to require a different kind of districting process, and they're fighting it tooth and nail. They're so afraid of fair districts. One, the Constitution requires that maps be drawn by certain deadlines. Those have been missed. It requires transparency. It's been behind closed doors. Round one of the process, they not only egregiously gerrymandered the map, they told the court that they thought the Constitution, the new language, was optional. That didn't go well. It got struck down. Round two, they tried to be a little more tricky. They drew every swing district to be a Democratic district, fooling no one. That was struck down yesterday. As if it weren't bad enough, one of the justices is the son of the sitting governor. Now, it's a basic ethical rule in Ohio and most places that you shouldn't be ruling on cases involve your father, right? Well, in Ohio, that's happening. And of course, the son not only refuses to recuse himself, he sided with dad every single case. Now, one other thing going on. So amid all this chaos, people had to decide whether to run for office. This goofy legislature will not extend the deadline of filing. And so right now we have candidates all over Ohio running for office, not knowing what their district's going to look like, not even knowing if they live in it. That's on purpose. They're trying to create delay, chaos, confusion. So much confusion the other day, they literally asked the court with a straight face, let's stay all of this until after the election on our rigged maps. Seriously? The clear goal there was to actually change the makeup of the court after November's election to get a more favorable court. And now that all this is falling apart, they're blaming the court for the chaos in a statement yesterday. And one group said the Chief Justice, a Republican, should be impeached. They know how they're in power. We have to finally end this broken system.
Well, that does sound very broken. A justice is the son of the governor of the state of Ohio. I need a name. I definitely need a name for that. But that sounds like a lot of drama in Ohio. Lack of transparency, purposeful delays, and just drawing up very gerrymandered districts. Now, Democrats have introduced legislation to end the practice of gerrymandering, and it's called, what's it called? The Protect the Vote Act. And it's not supported by any Republicans at this point, and it hasn't passed the Senate. So Republicans can't complain about gerrymandering, but Democrats can and should complain until a critical mass of concerned citizens in the United States say, yes, the Protect the Vote Act must be passed. Joe Manchin must get on board. Kristen Sinema must get on board and stop taking money from corrupt, uber wealthy people who want to keep America locked in dysfunctional governance and unable to pass legislation to protect election integrity, to protect fair districting practices, to protect the mechanisms that give accountability to the American people from their elected leaders. Because if you can gerrymander a district and you can pick your own voters, then you are not properly being held accountable by the electoral process, and you can do what you want, and that you are not bound to the social conscience of the public you claim to represent. So this thing that I have up on the screen now is some of the biggest Facebook groups promoting the Canadian trucker protest before they were shut down yesterday. And something was a bit off. The only individual administrator was running some of the most active groups was in Missouri, but it turns out she was actually hacked. The woman's daughter posted a message onto the group saying, "I like how you hacked my mum's bleep, but you won't answer my direct message." I called the woman on her publicly listed number. She said her account had been hacked. The stolen account was administering a Facebook groups, a collection of Facebook groups started between January the 26th and the 28th that had amassed more than 300,000 followers and had 7,500 posts. So that's a hacked, ostensibly American account in Missouri, being the administrator for these huge groups. There is illicit, shadowy, secret funding behind these protests in Canada, coordinating these protests. And that reminds me of a lot of the people that Robert Mueller indicted after he completed the Mueller investigation. A lot of the Russian agents who had posed as Americans in order to use racial antagonism, racial enmity in the United States, to use whitelash to create fear and to funnel people towards voting for Donald Trump, even though he was known to be a businessman with some shady practices, a habit of litigating others, and a habit of being sued for fraudulent practices and participating in money laundering. So, yep, I still argue people should delete Facebook, and it turns out Facebook has been slightly falling in its number of users, which means people are becoming more aware of its abusive practices. And the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Hagen, probably helped, but just talking to each other helps too. Try not to be on Facebook, delete the program. It facilitates anti-democratic activity and disinformation. It's a coordinated foreign attack on Ottawa, yes, on the capital of Canada. And it's going to be repeated in capital cities around the world. This is an old comment from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said in February the 13th of last year that there is no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. So that was some initial moral clarity from Mitch McConnell. Then he subsided with calling out Donald Trump. But then again today, because the RNC decided to put out a statement, basically endorsing the violence of January the 6th by saying that Republican Liz Cheney and Republican Adam Kinzinger have been participating in persecuting those who engaged in legitimate political discourse, which obviously was not what happened on January the 6th. A violent mob incited to violence and to attack by Donald Trump and his various allies, including his son, Donald Trump Jr., Peter Navarro, everybody who lied about the election. Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, look, a lot of Republicans, quite frankly, participated to different degrees in whipping up a mob, in contributing to that mob dynamic of those people who then went on to injure 140 officers, both the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan DC Police on that day. And we have to keep talking about it because it's part of a fascist trajectory of disinformation to sweep it under the carpet and pretend it's irrelevant and pretend that the dynamics at play on that day aren't still continuing, with even more anti-democratic measures being taken all over the United States in different states. Basically, white people have to pay attention to the broad, large-scale efforts to disenfranchise Black voters. We have to work to get our heads around it, to understand how, yes, removing polling places in areas where there's high density populations and high percentage of Black voters, that is being done purposefully and willfully to disenfranchise at a collective level the Black vote, because it is known that a high proportion of Black American voters vote for Democratic candidates. So it's a way of trying to swing more elections in favor of Republican candidates. It's a way of trying to manipulate American democracy to bring back Donald Trump and to create a one-party managed democracy in the United States. So more people need to know what a managed democracy is and why it's bad for a population. Russia has a managed democracy. Vladimir Putin essentially controls the media. The media and the government aren't separate, so they report glowingly on the actions of their president. Election integrity is dubious, and protests are violently repressed. Dissidents are murdered and jailed. Navalny, the most significant political opposition to Vladimir Putin, is in jail currently on trumped up, made up charges. And after having survived an attempted assassination attempt on him with a Russian nerve agent, Novichok, being administered to him, I think through the lining of his underpants, somebody claimed, which I presume they did so that it would sound ridiculous when people talk about it. But there you go, poor Navalny, he managed to survive. He returned to Russia and was swiftly imprisoned. That's what a coalition of conservatives are trying to bring about for the United States. And you need to keep that in mind if people try and persuade you to talk negatively about the Biden and Harris administration. They're not fascists. They don't make grandiose claims to solve everything in one fell swoop. They've made an effort to try and vaccinate the entire American population. They've just been met with sizable resistance from people who are being essentially programmed to be sacrificial lambs, to be collateral damage for the Republican Party's quest to achieve more power and to regain some lost power. Collateral damage is a good word. I'm going to write it down. Phrase. Hundreds of thousands of people. If you know people who have died basically disinformation deaths, you'll know it's a heartbreaking tragedy. People who are lost to this world too soon because they refuse to get vaccinated for a vaccine-preventable disease, thinking that it was against their religion, that it would show disloyalty to Donald Trump, that it would make a mockery of all the firm stances that they had taken on social media after being prompted to do so by the Republican leaders and the Republican loyal religious leaders that they may have heard, the podcasters they may have been exposed to, all of whom contributed to the miasma in their brain saying, yep, it's a plot from Democrats and the media to get us to take COVID seriously and to get us to take these microchipped, magnetizing vaccines. Obviously, those arguments are nonsense. Being boosted, having a third dose as an adult for the vaccine, or a third dose if you're over a certain age. I think even children over 11 can get actually, I don't know how old you have to be to get a booster, but definitely adults can, and I'm boosted, and my children are too young to get a booster, but they have their 2 doses. My husband and I have our 3 doses, so we know there's a high degree of protection for us, at least, to not die from COVID. And it's relatively unlikely for us to be hospitalized either. And that's a good feeling. We still wear masks. We still don't want to get COVID. There are still sequelae associated with that disease involving potential fatigue, organ damage to your kidneys, lots of things. So anything you can think of that would be deleteriously affected by microscopic blood clots. Yes, that's a potential condition. And they're working out potential treatments for long COVID, but long COVID sufferers are by no means out of the woods yet. So I did spend a long time talking about what Mitch McConnell had said in February of last year, but I'd like to just quickly say what he said this year, which is, today, he said, we all were there. We saw what happened. It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next. That's what it was. So he said that out loud today, which is a break from the RNC and their description of January the 6th participants as those engaged in legitimate political discourse. Thanks for listening. If you found anything I said interesting, please run with that and look it up and learn more. Tomorrow, I'd really like to talk about Robert Smalls, who was an enslaved person who, during the Civil War of the United States, had skills. He knew how to pilot a ship. He knew the hand signals that were required to pass Confederate ports, and he got the family members of crewmates on the ship to be brought on board the ship one night, and at 3 a.m. he smuggled the ship out of the Confederate harbor, wore the captain's coat and hat, and posed adopting the mannerisms of the captain and making the correct hand signals, and was able to bring that ship to the Union Army, the Union Navy, and hand it over and say, I hear you would like some more guns, and was celebrated for his daring, the incredible bravery, because they could have been fired on by Confederates, they could have been fired on by the Union. They pulled up a bed sheet to serve as a white flag to say, please don't fire on us, to the Union Army as they approached with this stolen Confederate ship. And so all of the black enslaved people, their enslaved family members, were all won their freedom by that plan, that audacious plan and action from Robert Smalls, who subsequently went on to become a member of Congress for 5 terms and was instrumental in Southern California to introducing free and compulsory public school education. So he had a tremendous influence on this world, and he still continued to face persecution, and not once he was a celebrated military hero, because his case also helped convince Abraham Lincoln to then allow Black Americans to enlist in the war for the Union Army. So 5,000 troops were then able to fight as part of the Union Army to help win that battle, not only for the Union, but for the freedom of their community. More broadly speaking, the community of oppressed people who had been enslaved in the United States. And so that's a remarkable life. I'd like to talk about that next time. I'm really excited to tell you his story. I think there's 2 biopics potentially in the works. I just came across it today because of a Twitter account that described that initial part of the story, the daring breakthrough Confederate lines to bring a gunship to, well, it was a transport ship fitted with some guns and supplies to the Union Army, and thereby saving the lives, winning the freedom of all the people on the ship. And his own wife was initially shocked and said, "Yes, I will die with you because otherwise I will die. I will die not free." And the other female family members of the crewmates were initially quite upset and had to be quieted. Otherwise, they would have given the game away that the ship was being stolen at 3 a.m. So just to imagine, because they knew some of the risks of you abandon your masters and the army that you're embedded in, you are betraying the Confederates, which they did, because the Confederates were pro-slavery and pro-imprisoning these people, separating them from their family members at the will of the masters. I don't want to use the word masters anymore, so I'll stop and have to go. But thanks for listening today. So much to discuss. If you have any ideas on how to participate in the show yourself and you want to be part of any future broadcast, please let me know. I welcome people who are pro-democracy and pro-science, pro-taking climate action to preserve some more future for our children, because it's not a dichotomy of either everything's all fine and dandy or we're all going to be obliterated in the blink of an eye, like with a comet in Don't Look Up, but rather there's going to be increasingly severe and frequent extreme weather events. This is why I'm trying to get democracy back on track and to have functional government in the United States. There's some, but there's 3 different branches, and the Supreme Court branch is stacked with dysfunctional arch conservatives who are sabotaging women's rights to bodily autonomy. They're rubber stamping gerrymandering, which is a perversion of democratic accountability. They're doing a lot of bad things, and they're like that because they were stacked by a Republican-controlled Senate, which is easily controlled by Republicans, because the disproportionate nature of Senate representation means people from smaller states with smaller populations have votes that carry much greater potency and weight. So there's some fundamentally undemocratic elements of the American political system that were baked in when America was founded, baked into its foundational documents in order to placate, in order to make concessions to slave owners. So, that's all from me. I've got to go. Thanks. Take care and talk to you again soon. Bye.